Hello, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow mathletes. I hope you're all doing well. We're going to be looking in this video at question number 4 on our 2010 grade 12 Euclid contest. We've got part A here. We're going to start off with that. It's a light bulb question. Thurka bought some stuffed goats and some toy helicopters. She paid a total of $201. She did not buy partial goats or partial helicopters. Okay, no half helicopters or anything like that. Fine. Each stuffed ghost cost Thurka $19, and each toy helicopter cost her $17. How many of each did Thurka buy? Okay. Well, I don't know these numbers, but we need to figure out number of goats and number of toy helicopters, so we can give names to these unknowns. If you're trying to write this up nice and neat as though it were a written question, you might say something like, let G equal number of goats bought, H be the number of toy helicopters bought. But if you are just looking for the answer, do your work on a rough page, and you don't have to explain to yourself, unless you get really confused about these things, what your symbols mean. Just make them sensible. Okay, number of goats, number of helicopters, and we know she spent $201, and we can set up an equation in terms of how many goats, because each goat cost $19, each helicopter $17, and that's really all we're given. I was expecting maybe another expression, but okay, 19 times G plus 17 times H. Okay, and we can even get rid of the dollars. 201 is 19G plus 17H. All right. So how can we figure this out? Well, one thing you could do is make quite a big chart. Just an absolutely huge chart, and say, all right, if she bought one helicopter, how many goats would that be to make 201? Oh, it's 18.3 goats. Well, we weren't allowed to have partial goats, so that doesn't work. And you can start to do things like that. If you are going to do that, I recommend you start making your chart and count based on number of goats. That does not look like a G. Just because goats will cover the ground from 0 to 201 a lot faster, because it's 19 times the number of goats. And so you might say, well, could she have bought 3 goats? Okay. And then you'd say, well, 3 times 19, so that's $57 of her bill, minus 201, divide that by 17, and you'd get 8.470 something helicopters. That's not allowed, so could she have 4 goats? Could she have 5 goats? And making a chart like this is fine, especially if you're sort of lost, you don't know exactly how to start solving something like this. That is a fine thing to do. We're not going to need to do it. Now, 19 and 17 are quite close together, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I guess in a sense, work mod 7. And if you're not comfortable with modular arithmetic, it is a very useful thing to have. But basically, I'm just going to ignore all the multiples of 17. Did I say 7 or 17? I mean modulo 17. And this is the problem. I can't rewind and listen to myself easily. But basically, any multiple of 17, we ignore it. We're just looking at remainders. And the remainder, when I divide by 17 on the 201 side, 201 divided by 17 is 11.8 something. Subtract off 11 and then multiply that by 17. We get 14. Okay? 14, you can say remainder when you divide by 17, or you can say mod 17. Now, 17H has no remainders when you divide by 17, so that's kind of nice. It gets rid of a whole expression. 19G, well, 19, what's the remainder of 19 when you divide by 17? 2. So you get 2G. And now I can see, okay, the number of goats that are bought, mod 17, so the remainder of the number of goats I buy when I divide by 17, multiplied by 2 has to equal 14. And this becomes a very easy equation to solve. So 14 is equal to 2G. G is going to be 7. So if I buy 7 goats, that should make everything work out. So 7 goats Well, how many is that? So 19 times 7, that's 133. What's left over? 68. So 201 minus 19 times 7 is 68. And that is a multiple of 17, just as you would think. That's 4 times 17. So 4 helicopters and 7 goats were bought. No guess and check, no trial and error, nothing like that. This is the power of working with remainders, working in modulo systems. And it can be quite powerful, not just on the Euclid, but in more advanced contests as well. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. It's just a light bulb, so I won't particularly write out a whole lot, but you would just make an argument and say, I'm working with remainders and things like that. They're a very useful tool. Okay, 4b, this is the one we actually have to write up. Determine all real values of x for which x plus 8 to the 4 is equal to 2x plus 16 squared. Okay. So let's copy that down and let's start thinking. X plus 8 to the 4, 2x plus 16 squared. So I think there's sort of two approaches you might go. One person might come along and say, well, I'll just expand these out, set them equal to each other, rearrange, get it so it's a polynomial. You know, it's something like x to the 4 minus 3x to the 3. I don't know what the actual polynomial would be, but something like this. And say, okay, now I need to figure out the roots of this or something like that. That's one way to do it. Expand both sides, rearrange, but you're going to be solving a quartic. Okay? The, I think, greater impulse for most people would say, well, I've got exponents, can I try and get rid of some of them? And if you're thinking, hey, let's square root both sides, that sounds like a great idea. So square rooting both sides would get me x plus 8 squared, and then square roots cancel out with squares, right? So you'd get 2x plus 16. Except not always. Okay? So this is true, but what's also true is, and you might remember this, sometimes when you square root you do plus and minuses. Maybe you don't quite understand exactly why that is yet. Well, this is one of those situations where you have two cases. You'll have the plus case and the minus case. But both of these lead to quadratics, and both of them are going to be a little easier to work with. Okay? So we might say something, since it's a written question, let's write it up a little nicer. So I might say this implies x plus 8 squared is 2x plus 16 or negative 2x plus 16. Two different cases. They're absolutely possible. Okay, so this leads to two cases. Case 1, x plus 8 squared is equal to 2x plus 16. Alright, so that's x squared plus 16x plus 64 is equal to 2x plus 16. Rearrange this, x squared plus 14x plus 48 is equal to 0, and now I have to ask myself, can I factor this? Do I need to use the quadratic formula? I think we should be able to factor this. 6 and 8 will work just fine. Okay. So x equals negative 6, x equals negative 8. Okay, so there we go. That's two solutions. That's one case dealt with. What about the other case? Okay. And just really quickly, you can also, once you've got these, check. Negative 6 plus 8 would be 2. 2 to the 4 is 16, so that would give me a 16 over here. Negative 6 times 2 is negative 12. Negative 12 plus 16 would be 4. 4 squared is 16, so that works out. And with negative 8, you're going to get 0 on both sides. So that's kind of nifty. All right. So that's the other so that's one possibility. Let's get the other possibility going. And it's, again, just a quadratic. But quadratics are a lot easier to solve than cubics. Okay. So 16x plus 64. It's the same expansion on the other side. It's just we are left with a different polynomial here. And so when we rearrange, now we get 18x. And we get 80 over here. But 10 and 8 will work just fine. So x is, we get negative 8 again, but we also get negative 10. So to conclude, x can be -6, -8, -10, and that's all the possibilities. -8 being repeated twice. And the -10 case, what's that going to be? Well, over here it's going to be -2 to the 4 is, again, 16, and then you'll get -4 squared is also 16. Okay? But if you had just said, oh, square root both sides, and you'll get x plus 8 squared equals 2x plus 16, and you ignore this minus case, you're missing out on a whole answer, and you will lose marks because of it. Okay? So you have to be careful, and if you're confused as to when plus or minuses happen and square roots and things like that, that's something that you might want to inquire about on your own. It's also something that I find a lot of high school teachers have a good explanation for. Not all, but some, and something worth asking about or worth trying to clarify on your own as to the true meaning there. Okay, so that finishes up question number 4. We've done both parts. I will see you in the next video for question number 5. Until then, have a wonderful day.